to begin with our prayer that the zchut of our learning should help to bring home all of the hostages and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents and bring a speedy end to all of our conflicts.
Amen.
And we have to be grateful for the three that got out and hope that we'll see more this week. And on that note, so last week we were looking at the sugya about the chole. Just a second. So let's do a little bit of review. The Mishnah said, here, let me get this to be bigger. And Michael Schwartz, why don't you read from the Mishnah?
Where are you from? Ma'achilin or chola?
From Mecholeh.
Chola ma'achlin oto al pi beki'in. Ve'im ein sham beki'in ma'achlin oto al pi atzmo ad she'amar dai.
Okay, so what we said about this so far, so what does that mean? First, you can translate that for us.
So if a sick person, we feed a sick person on the word, on the mouth of experts, and if there are no experts, we feed them according to his own word until he says enough.
Okay, so we made some diukim about this Mishnah, and we see also that the Gemara did. So let's skip down to the Gemara that we read and discuss this. So here, this is the Mishnah that you just read. Cholem achilin otal pi bikiin. So continue reading. Amar Rabbi Yanai.
Amar Rabbi Yanai, Chole Omer Tzarich, Rofe Omer Eno Tzarich, Shomim LeChole. My timer, Lev Yudei Marat Nafsho, Bashita, Mahu Ditema, Rofe Kimla Tape Kamashmanlan.
Okay, so can you
get done?
translate all of this? Go ahead.
Up a little. If a sick person says they need, and the doctor says they don't need, we listen to the sick person. What's the reason? There's a pasuk that says that the heart knows the bitterness of the soul. This is obvious, but you might have thought that the doctor knows better, that we establish the doctor better, and therefore the Mishnah comes to teach us that's not the case.
Okay, so this is a statement of Rabbi Yanai, and Rabbi Yanai was a contemporary of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. And it's interesting because different Sfarim I looked at, the classify him in different ways. The what's the word I'm looking for? There's like a little encyclopedia of Tanaim and Amoraim that comes with the Bar Ilan project. So they put Rabbi Yanai, they say he's a fourth generation Tana, but there's a Sefer which I think I referenced before. You can download. I have it. I have an actual copy of it at home, but you can download it from HebrewBooks.org, called Toldot Tanaim VaAmoraim, by a fellow named Heinemann. It's quite an excellent work. It goes through and gives biographies of all the Tanaim and Amoraim in a lot of depth, in citing many of the places where they're mentioned. And he says Rabbi Yanai, though, was considered to be an Amora. The people who learned with Rebbe some of them are considered I think it must have been like the older ones are considered to be Tanaim, and maybe the younger ones were considered to be Amorim. It was it was the transitional generation of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So he because that's the time of the um Arichat Mishnah, right? That's the time of the redaction of the Mishnah. And then after that, all of the people, the Rabbanim that come after that are Amoraim. And what difference does it make if somebody is a Tana or an Amora? What difference does it make to us when we're learning Gemara?
I believe that in terms of who we we give precedence to Tanaim in Pesach, I believe.
Yeah, we could say it. Yes, you have to give precedence to Tanaim. So there was this general acceptance that from the time after the time of the Tanaim, that the Amoraim could not argue with Tanaim. That the corpus of work that the Tanaim produced, which was the Mishnah, the Tosefta, the Midrashei Halacha, all of those things are now considered to be the primary sources for Halacha, and you can't argue with them. But because there are many different opinions amongst the Tanaim, different Amoraim might have paskined like one Tana or another. But this generation of people who were at the end of the Tanaim and the beginning of the Amoraim, sometimes it's a gray area about them. With Rabbi Yanai, there are places. Yes, go ahead.
The Tanaim are mentioned in the Mishnah, and the Amoraim in the Gemara.
No, right.
Because when the Mishnah was written down,
yeah.
then all the rabbis some of the rabbis from the time before the Mishnah was written down are mentioned in the Mishnah, and afterwards in the Gemara.
Yes, right. So that's certainly true. But the question I was posing, which Michael Werner answered, is so what? In other words, what difference does it make if somebody is a Tana of the Mishnah or an Amora of the Gemara? So the difference in halacha is that after Chatimat Mishnah, then Amoraim were not considered to be in a position to argue with Tanaim. And so we've seen it already in Sugyot that we did, that the Gemara will, let's say a certain Amora will say a halakha, and then they'll be challenged from a Mishnah to say that the Mishnah contradicts you. And then maybe maybe the Gemara will answer by saying they hold like a different Tana. But they were not considered to be in a position to argue. So there are exceptions to this. One of them is Rav, who was also a Talmid of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And not in every place, but in a few places in the Gemara, where Rav says something that contradicts a Tana, the Gemara answers and says, Rav Tanahu Upalig. Rav is himself a Tana, and he argues. And in other words, he's in a position to argue. So I'm bringing this up because as I was, when I lay out the Gemara the way I do, so and I've pointed this out, that I have different fonts for Tanaim and Amoraim. So for the Tanaim, I use Times New Roman, and for the Amoraim, I use David. Those are two different fonts. So honestly, when I was doing Rabbi Yanai, I wasn't sure how to do the font. That's the difference it makes to me. But when we read this, so this is interesting things. Let's understand. Amar Rabbi Yanai. So Michael read, right? Chole amar tzarich, Rofei amar einot tzarich, shomin lechole. So then the Gemara says, "My ta'ama." So one of the questions that I would ask is, who's saying "my ta'ama"? Who's asking this question? What's the reason, or what's the reasoning behind this? Is that part of Rabbi Yanai's statement? Probably not. In other words, my time as you is a question that the Gemara asks on whatever is being discussed. So this would be the Ma'amar would be this, that Amar Rabbi Yanai, he says what he says up until Shomin L'Choleh, and on that then the Gemara asks the question, my Tama. So what's the source for saying, what's the reason that Rabbi Yanai would hold this din, that if the Choleh says that he needs to eat, but the doctor says he doesn't need to eat, that we listen to the Choleh. And so the answer is, if Yodea Marat Nafsho. The reasoning behind it is we know from this pasuk in Mishlei that the heart knows the bitterness of its soul. And we'll talk about that in a second. And then the Gemara continues and says, Pshita, that's obvious. So what's Pshita? What's obvious?
The statement in the text that actually could refer either to the statement in the text, or it could refer to or it could refer
No.
to,
What's the or? What's the other one?
or could refer to Rabbi Yanai's statement.
Right. Right. In other words, either it refers to the text of Mishlei or it refers to Rabbi Yanai. And so let's see from the Hemshech. So the Hemshech says, Pshita, it's obvious. Mahu detema, what would you have said? Rofei kinle pei. That I like the way Michael Schwartz translated. The doctor knows, you might say the doctor knows better, right? It's literally the doctor, it's established to him more. In other words, he's the expert and he's the one who knows more. Kamash Malan, so then it comes to teach us. So what comes to teach us? That Rabbi Yanai is saying that not if it refers to Rabbi Yanai, so it means that Rabbi Yanai is saying that nonetheless listen to the Choleh, even if the doctor is more expert than the Choleh. And the reason for it would be Lev Yodea Marat Nafsho. So another pshita. I'm not sure if you can say pshita. I'm also not. I think Michael Werner. I think the thing that you pointed out. Those are the two
I'm
possibilities.
sorry.
The one we're talking about human experience. What? Go ahead.
I show you. You actually. Oops. Wait a second. Let me go back here. You actually froze out for a little bit, so we lost your last couple of
Oh,
sentences.
okay. I was worried about that because I can see myself. My internet is very weak right now. I'm not sure why. Okay, so if that happens again, just wave your hand. Um, so Michael Werner, you pointed out there are two possible understandings of this question of pshita. Does the pshita mean that Lev Yodea Marat Nafsho is pshita, or is Rabbi Yanai's statement pshita? Those are the two possibilities. And So what I was saying now is that I I would tend to think that the Pshita is going to refer to Rabbi Yanai, because it would be presumptuous to say that a pasuk in Tanakh is obvious. That is, we are looking at Tanakh to be the basis for our knowledge. So it seems that the pshita would be on the halachic statement, and that's the way pshita is used elsewhere in the Gemara, that there's a halacha that's stated, and then the challenge would be pshita, that halacha is obvious. So maybe the reason it's obvious is because we know we take as a given that Leiv Yodea Marat Nafsho, because that's a pasuk in Tanakh. But what's obvious is that because that's true, then it should be that if the Choleh says I need to eat, and the Rofeh says you don't need to eat, then we listen to the Choleh. So that's obvious. So Mahu Detema, but I might have thought that nonetheless, that because the doctor is more expert, that he would his psak, as it were, his decision would take precedence even over the Choleh. But Kamash Malan, so Rabbi Yanai's statement comes to tell me that that's not true. That halachically, I still go with the Choleh, even against the Rofei who's more expert. Okay, so keeping that in mind, let's continue. So now Michael Werner read Rofei Omer.
רופא אומר צריך וחולה אומר אינו צריך. שומעים לרופא. My timer. Tumva who dinakit le.
Dinakitle. Very good. So translate as much as you can translate.
So a doctor says that he needs food, and the sick person says that he doesn't need it. One listens to the doctor. What is the reasoning for this?
Okay, so you probably don't know what tunva is, and it's not a common word. So Rashi explains tunva is shtut. It's like a craziness, a foolishness. And this is some word in Old French. Asturdition. I don't know how to say that. Which means tishtu shadat, right? That the mind is fuzzy. Mechamat cholio, because of his sickness.
Oh, so delirium.
Yeah, he might that. So let's say it's a delirium that he's been taken dinakitle, like he's been taken hold of by this delirium. So in this case, okay, this beginning part, Rofei Omer tzarich v'choleh ma'eno tzarich shominu Rofei. So now this is a continuation of Rabbi Yanai's statement. This is just to keep everything in order. So we had Rabbi Yanai, he said the first statement, if the Choleh says I need, and the Rofeh says he doesn't need, then we listen to the Choleh. And then we interrupted that by discussing it. What's the reason? It's obvious, etc. But now we're back to his second statement. So if there's a machloket between the Rofeh and the Choleh in the case where the Rofeh is the Mekil, the Rofeh says he needs to eat, and the Choleh says I don't need to eat. I listen to the Rofeh. So now I also need to know what's the reason, because why? In other words, what's difficult now about this statement?
It seems to contradict the earlier statement.
Yes. How does it seem to contradict the earlier statement?
in the earlier statement, we listen to the patient because the heart knows the bitterness of the soul. And this statement would seem to imply that no, the heart really doesn't understand it. The doctor.
Right. In other words, and what was our Hava Mina before? We said, well, maybe because the doctor knows more, we'll listen to him, but Kamash Malan that we don't. And here all of a sudden we listen to the doctor. So here we need a reason why now do we listen to the doctor over the chole? So what's the reason?
We assume the chole is delirious.
Yeah, so or at least we fear that the chole is delirious, and therefore he's not in a position to make a sound judgment even about the depths of his own heart, right? In other words, he's not necessarily in a position to describe his own situation. Which, by the way, having experienced delirium myself, I think this is quite true. Well, years ago, when a couple of times in my life, I've had bouts of flu where I've been delirious, and honestly was not in a position to make any sound judgments about my own health. So I can testify to this. Okay, so we have this statement of Rebbe Yanai, and Rebbe Yanai's statement, on the face of it, is also difficult because of our Mishnah. The Gemara is now going to go through this by looking back at the Mishnah. So now, Paul, you should read Tanan.
הנ"ל, חולה מאכילים אותו על פי בקיעין, על פי בקיעין אין, על פי עצמו לא.
Okay, so I should just tell you, Apibikin, the word here is in, with a
בקיעין, בקיעין, כן.
bikin, in, not ein, in. This word.
This ein
This
is
word is
in.
It's in. In means yes. It's counterintuitive, but in
Doesn't make sense.
it,
In which language is in?
in
Yes.
Aramit, al pi bikin
What?
in, according to bikin yes, al pi atzmo lo.
No. Okay, now it makes sense too. That at least the sentence makes sense.
I know it takes a while, but eventually, it's one of those tricks of language. But al pi bikin in, al pi atzmo lo. Okay.
Okay.
Keep reading.
על פי בקיעין in. Same as before. על פי בקי אחד לא. הבקיעין, על פי בקיעין, in the plural. In,
Right.
על פי בקי אחד לא.
Okay, so explain what you've read. This is what the Mishnah said.
Okay. Well, as we saw before, a sick person, all this is in during Yom Kippur, yes?
Right. This is all on Yom Kippur.
On Yom Kippur, yeah. A sick person, you feed him according to the experts. According to the experts, yes. According to himself, no. According to the experts, yes. According to one single expert, no.
Okay. So these are the diukim from the Mishnah. In other words, if I read the Mishnah straight, the way we just read it, this is what I would deduce from the Mishnah. Machilino tal pibikin tells me two things: that in order to feed somebody on Yom Kippur who's sick, I need two experts,
Two experts. Yes.
right? And I feed him according to experts and not based on his own statement, right? Al pi bikiin in, al pi atzmo lo, al pi bikiin in, al pi baki achad lo. These are two things that I get now from the Mishnah.
But this is in contradiction with the preceding passage.
Exactly. So here, this is really the Gemara asking a kasha on Rabbi Yanai, right? Exactly what Paul said, exactly what you said,
Mhm.
right? Because before we said, first of all, that the chole that we can machilino to piatzmo, even when the doctor contradicts him, and lehefech, that if the doctor contradicts him to say that he should eat, then I feed him according to one doctor. In other words, it contradicts both of Rabbi Yanai's statements.
שומעים לרופא, לא לרופאים, לרופא.
Rofei, right?
A single רופא.
A single rofei. Rofei omer tzarich, chole omer no tzarich, shomin rofei. It's one rofei. So
there are two contradictions, yes.
there's two contradictions.
Mhm.
So the Mishnah contradicts Rabbi Yanai in two places. So the Gemara has to answer for Rabbi Yanai. So keep reading. Hacha.
Acha במאי עסקינן, דאמר, לא צריכנה,
Lo tzrichna. Stop there.
לא צריכנה.
Okay. So hacha b'mayas kinan. What does that mean?
And so, what is
Hacha askinan from the word litasek. It's b'meh anachnu mitaskim.
במה אנחנו מתעסקים כאן?
Okay, so what are we? So in other words, what are we dealing with here? What are we dealing with? What is so?
What's the question, or something like this?
Well,
what's the problem? What's the question?
No, so what it means is hacha b'mayas kinan. It means when the Mishnah says chole machiyino talpi bekiyin, what are the circumstances that we are dealing with? That's what it means. Hacha here in our Mishnah, the hacha refers back to the Mishnah. Here in our Mishnah, what are the circumstances that we are dealing with? And what are we dealing with? The Amar, that he said, lo tzrichna, I don't need. Lo tzarich ani. That's where he says, I don't need. So who said I don't need?
The chole?
The chole. It's tzrichna. It's I don't need. Right? So the Mishnah is talking about a case to begin with where the chole said, I don't need to eat. People see that he's sick, and he says, I don't need to eat. And then the Mishnah says, Machilino to pi bikiin. Then I feed him according to experts.
There are two possibilities. Either the sick person says that I want to eat, or he says I don't want to eat. And these are two different cases.
Those are two different cases, but the Gemara here is saying, in order to reconcile Rabbi Yanai with the Mishnah, then Rabbi Yanai is assuming that the Mishnah is speaking to begin with about a case where the Choles said, I don't need to eat. And in that case, so that answers at least one question for Rabbi Yanai. What's the question that it answers?
if the sick person should eat or not eat, who decides if you should eat or not eat? But it doesn't answer the question about many beki'in, not one beki'in.
It doesn't, right. So the answer is one, the answer is at least one question where it says, so now I understand what the Mishnah, the way I would read the Mishnah would be, Cholesh Omer Ani lo tzarich lechol, but Bikiyin see that he needs to eat, then we feed him according to the Bikiyin. And then that would be like what Rabbi Yanai said. In it,
Yes.
that would be like the second part of Rabbi Yanai, Rofei Omer tzarich v'chol Omer eino tzarich shomin l'rofei. But it doesn't answer the question about one
baki
one baki, or
so,
do I need one baki, or do I need two bakiin? Because it says bikiin.
Yes.
Okay.
Lispolia al pi baki.
Yeah. So yeah, v'lispole al pi baki means, and you should feed then, or let us feed him according to
one baki,
an expert, right?
A
single expert. And so Gemara says, "Lo." Go ahead.
Lo tzricha deika acharina behedia de'amar lo tzarich.
Okay, so lo tzricha. No, I still need it. I still need the Mishnah to tell me that I feed him according to Bikiyin, because diika achrina behadei yesh acher ito. There's another baki, the amar lo tzarich, that says he doesn't need to eat. So
that's
from the Mishnah. That
so
when
if the sick person doesn't want to eat, and
hold on a
there's
second.
only one baki, then they can't force him to eat. Only if there are two beki'in, they can force him to eat. Is that right?
Not exactly. So,
Okay.
okay, so here, think of it this way.
You were the
Baki.
first one, but now you're the last one.
Let's look at Rashi for a minute. Hacha b'maya skinan. Hacha b'maya skinan. Michael Schwartz, you can read. Hacha b'maya skinan.
Hacha b'maya askinan da'amar kolel lo tzirik ba'ishma'o mishma'oinan matnitin de'shomin l'rofin. Here, what are we dealing with? That the sick person says that he doesn't need, and we listen
Right.
to them from our Mishnah that we listen to the doctors.
Okay, Ashmoinan means that we learn from, or it's implied from the Mishnah.
So it's from the Mishnah that we listen to the doctors.
Okay, so what are we talking about? It's that so this is what we said, right? That the Choles says, the Mishnah is talking to begin with about a case where the Choles says, I don't need to eat. And so then the Mishnah tells me that in that case, I listen to the doctors. So like we said, that answers the first kasha, it answers one of the kashas on Rabbi Yanai, because Rabbi Yanai also talked about the case where the Choles says, I don't need to eat. And then I listen to the Rofeh if the Rofeh says he needs to eat. So then Gemara asked on the Benisfule al pi baki. Michael Schwartz, keep reading. Daha.
Hab echad nami amar Rabbi Yanai deshomim l'rofeh. So we feed him according to one expert that this is in one also that Rabbi Yanai, we listen to the doctor. It's not clear to me. Also
Okay.
says that Rabbi Yana that we listen to the doctor.
Okay, so so I'll tweak a little. Venice, right? So we should feed him according to an expert. Daha be'echad nami amar Rabbi Yanai deshomin l'rafeh. Because Rabbi Yanai said we also listen to just one baki. So why didn't so what? So it's the Gemara is asking the question on the other part of Rabbi Yanai. I still have the problem that Rabbi Yanai says that you feed him based on one rofei, and the Mishnah says I need two. So the Gemara answers, no, I still need it. I need to say that the Mishnah is talking about a case where Ika Achrina Bahadei, there's another rofei, the Amar Lo Tzarich. In other words, what happened? So what are we saying so far? We're saying that the Mishnah is dealing in a case where there's a choleh. He says, I don't, and it's Yom Kippur, and we see that he's ill, and the choleh says, I don't need to eat. And another doctor says, you do need to eat. So at that point, according to Rabbi Yanai, we should feed him. But the Mishnah says, I need two doctors' opinions to feed him. So the Gemara is saying that's where there was a doctor who says he doesn't need to eat. So it's set up like this. I have the choleh. He says I need to eat. Dr. A says you don't need to eat. He agrees with the choleh. And another doctor says you do need to eat. So that in that case, then I need two doctors to say he needs to eat. Because I have an expert that is saying he doesn't need to eat. I need two experts to override his opinion. That's how we're learning now. That's how we're learning the Mishnah now. And that's how we'll understand Rabbi Yanai in the context of our Mishnah. Okay, let's continue. So Michael Werner, read. Ma'achilinoto. You've muted.
מאכילים אותו על פי בכים, פשיטה. ספק נפשות הוא, וספק נפשות להקל. לא צריכה. דיקה תרי אחריני דהדיה.
Bahadeh.
דהדה. דאמרי לא צריך.
Stop.
Okay.
Okay, so explain what you've read.
So we feed, or he is fed according to the opinion of experts in the plural. That's obvious. It's a case of, it's a matter of life. It's a matter of, it's a doubt about a life or death matters. Is that a good translation? Safek nafshot.
Yes, that's fine.
And
it's Safek nifashot.
nefashot.
Safek nifashot. Go ahead.
It's a doubt in matter of life or death, and in doubt in a matter of life or death, we rule leniently.
And what's the leniency here?
He's fed on Yom Kippur.
Okay. So what's the question of pshita? Why is Machinoto Pivikin pshita? Why is it pshita? Because
you've got multiple excerpts for saying that it needs to eat.
No. What does the Gemara say? Pshita, safek nefashotu, v'safek nefashot lahakel. This is explaining what's pashut.
Okay.
Okay, so explain. So why is it pashut? Why is it pshita that we feed the chole on Yom Kippurim according to experts? Why is that obvious?
Because if there's a doubt in matters of life and or death, we rule leniently.
Right. In other words, so the Mishnah Bichal is obvious because it's a fake nefashot, lahakel. So obviously we're going to feed him. So why would I need the Mishnah to tell me ma'achilino to al pi bikiyin? So the Gemara says, lo tzricha. No, I still need it. Why? Diika, in a case where diika trei achrine bahadei, where kisheyesh shnei acherim ito, right? So it's a case where there are two other doctors, the Amri lo tzarich, and they say he doesn't need to eat. So again, it's saying that when do we say when is what's the chidush of the Mishnah Machinot al pi bikin? So if it would be a case stam, where I have a chole, and even if the chole, what we learned from before, even if the chole says I don't need to eat, but doctors say that he does need to eat, then I feed him according to the doctors. So that should be obvious. So the Gemara says the reason it's not what the Mishnah is telling me is a case that's less obvious, and that would be a case where there are two doctors who say he doesn't need to eat, and two doctors who says he does need to eat. And in that case, machilino toba bikiyin, because it's safek nefashot. Because think of it this way. So let's say we have two doctors who say he doesn't need to eat, and two doctors who say he does need to eat. So it's 50-50. It's 2 against 2. So why would I go with the ones who say that he has to eat?
Because in Sefek Nafashot we rule Lakula.
Right. So that's the chiddush. The chiddush is I rule the kula even when the safek is even when the safek is countered as it were by doctors who say it's not a safek. Whereas the doctors who say he doesn't need to eat, they hold it's not a safek. They say no, he doesn't need to eat. And the other ones say that. Go ahead.
I could see where this principle would apply, even if you have you have more than two doctors who say that he doesn't need to eat, and you still have two doctors say that he doesn't eat. I can see where this principle would apply. That even a minority opinion would.
Yes, and hold on to that. It's an important point. So for right now, though, we're just saying we'll say as it says. But let's go on in the Gemara. So Paul, you read Va'afal Gav.
Afal Gav, the Amar, Rav, Safra. Another Amorai?
He's another Amora. Yes.
Amora. Tre כמאה ומאה כתרי. אני מילי לעניין עדות, אבל לעניין אומדנה, בתר דעות הזלינן.
Okay, stop. That's a lot. So what did Rav Safra say?
It talks about 300.
Well, no. So Trey is 2.
Three is 2.
Trey is 2. Chada Trey, right? 2 are like 100.
Trey 12.
Yeah, like Treyasar,
Mhm.
right? It's 12, right?
Okay.
So Trey Himea, Umea Kitrey. So
Two
Rav,
like 100 and 100 like two.
2 are like 100, and 100 are like 2. So the Gemara is quoting Rav Safra obviously from somewhere else. And there's a sugya in Masechet Shavuot that that talks about this. But the idea of Rav Safra is that when like the Gemara says, Hane mile le'inyan edut, these words or these things these words of of Safra are regarding testimony. Avalinyan umdana, do you know what umdana is? From the word omed with an aleph,
Yeah, like estimation.
an estimation, right? But when it comes to estimating, right, or evaluating, batar deot azlinan, we go after opinions, meaning we go after a majority of opinions. So, what does all of that mean? Rav Safra had a statement where he said, in other words, once you have 2 Adim, there's no difference between having 2 Adim and 100 Adim. In other words, the minimum that you need for Edut in a court, right, in a Beit Din, you need 2 witnesses to testify. Once you have 2 witnesses to testify, it doesn't matter if you have 2 or if you have 100. And the other way around. You could have 100 or you could have 2. But that's only about Edut. In other words, so what does it mean? The more witnesses that you have doesn't strengthen your testimony. If you have 2 witnesses, that's the requirement for testimony. If you have 3 witnesses, if you have 10 witnesses, even if you have 100 witnesses, you still have the same testimony. The testimony is not stronger because you had more witnesses. But when you come to evaluations, then you go after opinions. So what does it mean, evaluations? If Beit Din needs to evaluate, let's say, a piece of property, so you get in, a shamai. What do we call that in English? It just escaped me.
Assessor.
An assessor. You bring in an assessor to assess the value of the property. And so let's say you have an assessor that says it's worth $100,000 and the other one says it's worth $150,000. So then, but if I get 2 of them that say it's worth $150,000, that has halachic meaning. Then I'm going to go after the rov. That's where the numbers of people who are involved counts. So here, what's our situation? The case that we just brought is a case where I had 2 doctors who said he needs to eat. I had 2 doctors says he doesn't need to eat. And so then you might say there's no difference between, it doesn't matter. Once I have 2 doctors, that it doesn't matter now if I bring 100 doctors. I might have thought that because of Rav Safra. Because Rav Safra says there's no difference between 2 witnesses and 100 witnesses. So you might say there's no difference between now 2 doctors and 100 doctors. But actually, that klal of Rav Safra is only applicable in cases where I need testimony. But in cases where I'm evaluating something, then actually the number of people that evaluate one way or another is significant. So that's the first step here in the Gemara. The next step, Paul, continue. Bahane mile.
והני מילי לעניין אומדנה דממונה, אבל הקה ספק נפשות הוא.
Okay, stop.
He said something like that, something, I'm not sure, but if it's
Okay.
about money or something like this,
Yeah.
I could think like that, but if it is pikuach nefesh, I can't just reason that way, something like this.
Okay, so yeah, so the Perush Miluli, Hane Mile, Hadvarim Ha'elu, Linyan Umdana de Mamona, Ze Legabe Omed Mamon, right? This is so the idea that I go after the rove of Deot, that's so that itself is only applicable when I'm dealing with financial matters. But here, in our case, we're dealing with matters of life and death. And we already said, in matters of life and death, we're mekil. And so, what does it tell me? That is, so this goes back to what Michael Werner alluded to, that that I could say now, it doesn't matter really how many doctors say that let's say he doesn't need to eat. I could argue is if I have even one doctor that says he needs to eat, that introduces a safek. So let's say I have 100 doctors who say he doesn't need to eat, and if nobody disagrees with them, so then we consider it to be vadai, right? Then that's certain that we don't need to feed him. But if one doctor says, no, I'm an expert and I say he needs to eat, so now I've broken the vadaut, right? It's not certain anymore. I've introduced a safek. And it doesn't matter that a lot more doctors said that he doesn't need to eat, as long as there's even one doctor, I could argue. And the reason, so we're bringing in Rav Safra here because the assumption is you've learned all of Shas, and you know that Rav Safra says this, and you might think that it's applicable here, because look, Rav Safra said that having 2 witnesses is the same as having 100 witnesses, so maybe having 2 doctors is the same as, once I get 2 expert opinions, then it doesn't matter how many more opinions I get. I'm going to go after the 2. But we say, no, that's only applicable in the case of testimony. But it's not applicable in the case of financial evaluations. But even, and then also here where we're talking about safek nefashot, even that's not applicable. So we have a 3-tiered system. If I have, or at least maybe tiers, I'm not sure if they're tiers, but we have 3 categories. So I have, in cases of edut, once I have 2 witnesses, it doesn't matter how many more witnesses I have, the testimony is going to be the same. For whatever purpose the testimony is, testimony will be the same. If I have different assessors assessing a property or something of value, and they disagree, in that case, I'm going to go after the rove. I'm going to go after whatever the majority opinion is. But here, in Safek Nefashot, once I have a Safek Nefashot, then I'll be Mekil if there's a disagreement. That seems to be what we get out of this. So,
if you speak of testimony, if it is a mishpat about money, I can understand. But if it is a mishpat about a murder, and you would like to you should decide if you have to hang him or not, then you are again in the case of pikuach nefesh. You might be wrong.
You might be wrong. Listen, in cases of capital punishment, even look, I'll put it this way: even in cases of financial issues,
Mhm.
you still have to you have to we would have to deal with a case where I have conflicting testimonies.
Okay.
So even when there's conflicting testimonies, so that leads into a whole another category of halacha. So I'm not going to get into it. But here, um, even though I'm not, it's not irrelevant what you're saying. It's relevant, but I'm going to leave this on a simpler level, and we're not going to get into it. What we get from this so far is that so we understand safek nefashot lahakel, and so even in the case where there are experts who claim that he doesn't need to eat, if there are experts that disagree with him, then we're going to feed him. So before we get to the next part, let's look at Rashi here. So Michael Schwartz, V'afal Gav.
Yafagav the Amar Rav Safra, the Hada Amor Rabbanan Trey Kamea Umea Katre, the Inyan Edut Hu the Amor Aval in the Inyan Umdan Ater Daot Azlinan, Ashma'inan, the Matnitin, the Chi, the Amrin, Zil Batar Daot, the Umdana de Mamona, Kagon the Shuma, the Shashmin, the Balko,
Sheshamin.
Sheshamin, the Balchov, Ababa Omdana, the Chole, Afagav the Rova Amri Lo Tzarich, Kivan de Echad Trey de Amar Trich, Sefek Nefashot Lakel.
Okay, so can you explain all that?
Okay, so that even though it was said that the rabbi said that 2 is like 100 and 100 is like 2, that's for the Indian of Edut for witnesses. It was said of all for the but for the Indian of estimating, we follow the majority of opinions, and our Mishnah teaches us that we say we go after the majority in the cases of estimating in money. For example, in assessing for a debt, but for estimating about an illness, even though that the majority may say that he doesn't need, since there's 2 that say that he needs, because it's a life and death matter, we rule leniently.
Very good. So in other words, based on Rashi's understanding is that as long as there are 2, and now this is the diuk of the Mishnah, machilin oto al pi bikiyin. Why do I need 2? Because maybe there are 2 others who disagree with them. But once I have 2, even if more than 2 disagree with them, I'm going to feed him. What if it was 2 against 1? What if it were, in other words, the implication, the way Rashi's saying, is that I need a minimum of 2 bikiyin if there's a disagreement with other bikiyin. That's the implication of Rashi. Okay. I want to do the last part, but I don't think we're going to have time to do it fully. So I'm just going to read myself. I'm going to read the next part and we're going to stop. And next time we'll pick it up from here and hopefully put it all together. And we'll look at the way Poskim understood this sugya, right? Because this sugya is obviously very relevant, right? I feel bisman hazeh, or maybe, I don't know, whatever, especially bisman hazeh, but we need to know if somebody's sick on Yom Kippur, how do we ultimately make an evaluation? Michael Werner, you want to read a little bit? Without the muting?
Yeah, so starting where it's highlighted, correct?
Yeah.
מאכלין אותו על פי עצמו, מכלל דרישה דאמר צריך. We feed him according to his own opinion.
Okay, so this is some language that you may not be familiar with. Michlal, in this context, it means that it means it implies
Okay.
that the Reisha is where he said, I need.
Okay.
So, just again, we're going to go over this part again next week, but the Mishnah said, right, this is just quoting the next part of the, it's just quoting the next part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, "Choleh machilin oto al pi bikiyin, v'imen sham bikiyin, machilin oto al pi atzmo." So once the Mishnah says machilin oto al pi atzmo, then what does that imply about the Reisha? It implies, hold on, Michal de Reisha de Amar Tzarich. It implies that in the Reisha, he said that he needed to eat. And that's a problem because we just said, in order to reconcile Rabbi Yanai with the Mishnah, that the Mishnah must be talking about a case where the Choleh said, I don't need to eat. So again, we'll go through this more next week, but continue reading. Chisuri Mechsara.
Chisori mechsara v'hachi
Katani.
ketani. So if there's a lack.
Okay, Chisuri Mechsar is a technical term. It means that there's a missing thing that is missing. Michael Schwartz. I don't know. Are any of you familiar with this term? Have you ever seen this? I don't think we've done it. Michael, go ahead.
It's saying that there's some language missing from the Mishnah. It's not complete.
Right. So, in other words, what the Gemara is going to do here, it's going to, as it were, insert words into the Mishnah. This is, we'll discuss more about this again next week. Let's just say, Chisuri Mechser B'Hachi Ketani means that the Mishnah is written missing some words. And what is it missing? But Chisuri Mechsera B'Hachi Ketani. And this is the way we will learn the Mishnah. You can keep reading.
And in what things, what things are we talking about here? De'emar lo tzarich ani, aval amar tzarich. Oh, ani.
Keep going. Aval amar tzarich ani.
Ein shem beki'in atre. Ele chad de'emar lo tzarich. Me'achalin oto al pi atzmo.
Okay. So right. So chisuri mechser b'hachiktani b'med dvarim amurim the amar lo tzarichani. So the Gemara is inserting these words in the Mishnah after the first part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said choleh machilin oto al pi bikiyin, and we already learned that part of the Mishnah to mean that's a choleh who says, I don't need to eat. And when he says, I don't need to eat, then I need bikiyin. Right? Bamed dvarim amurim, that choleh machilonot al pi bikiyin, da'amar lo tzarich ani. It's in a case where the choleh said, I don't need to eat. Aval amar tzarich ani, in other words, all of these are the words that are missing from the Mishnah. Aval amar tzarich ani, but if the choleh said, I do need to eat, ein sham bikiyin trei, and there aren't two bikiyin there, el echad amar lo tzarich, there's only one who said that he doesn't need to eat. Machilinoto al pi atzmo. In that case, I feed him according to himself. Let's read a little bit more. Go ahead, Michael Werner, go ahead.
Mar bar Rav Ashi Amar. So Mar, the son of Rav Ashi, says, Kol hecha de amar tzarichani, afilu ika mea de amrin lo tzarich. De amrin lo tzarich. L'didei shema'in shenema lev yodea marat nafsho. So if the sick person says, I need to be fed, I need food, even if there are 100 experts who say that he doesn't need to eat, we listen to this sick person, as is said, the heart knows the bitterness of the soul.
Okay. So that's where we're going to stop today. And so we'll go over this last part next time and put the whole thing together. But we've done what the Gemara here has done. It's reworked our basic understanding of the Mishnah, and it's expanded the number of cases and made clear certain piskei dinim about when we're mekil to be feeding a sick person on Yom Kippur. So I think it's a good place to stop. Any last questions or comments?
No.
Okay.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Thank you.
shalom.
Good night. Shabbat shalom.
Enjoy your winter.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.